Hi, and welcome to the Global Institute for Conscious Economics. My name is Rhiannon Roseland. I am a co-founder and CEO of the platform. What is conscious economics? Well, we really focus on four main pillars when we talk about building a new, more sustainable economy: the well-being of people, our planet, and the well-being of new sustainable profit models, as well as the integration of art. Today, our conversation touches on all of these themes as we sit down with AGAPI Gasessa, who is Executive Director for C Center for Young Black Professionals. We're also joined with Lieben Gerbmichael, who's the Executive Director for Taibu Community Health Center, and of course, Alika Hall, Executive Director for the NIA Center for the Arts. Our conversation today is titled Unmuted: How Corporate Canada Can Support Black-led and Black-serving organizations. Why unmuted? Well, it's kind of hard to critique a system when you're operating within that system in order to do your work on the ground and to keep your organizations flowing. I think today's conversation will allow some of our leaders in this country that are serving the Black community to be able to speak more freely and openly about how we can connect and work together to create a better system for all people and stop systemic racism in its tracks. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So thank you all so much for coming and gathering with us today. I think it's such an important moment in time for us to have this conversation. Our purpose for today is really to hear from you and talk to corporate Canada and be able to create an alignment where we can understand how to better work together, how to better serve Black-led and Black-serving organizations. Mm-hmm. So I think the first place to start is with a bit of a definition. The concept of 3B. AGAPI, can you tell us a little bit about the concept and how corporate Canada can use this concept when they're thinking about their strategy of supporting the community?
Yeah, I think that there's three kind of check boxes that need to happen here. One is it a Black-led organization? Meaning, is the governance, their board, are they predominantly Black? Is their leadership Black? Are most of their staff people of color as well? So Black, Black-serving, and Black-focused. So if you are a Black-focused organization, again, you're going to have a very clear mission in your organization that says that you're serving Black folks. And then you're also going to have possibly Afrocentric or a Black lens to the work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. So if you're teaching somebody about a particular topic, that it's coming from the lens of you being a Black person in Canada. So Black-led, Black-serving, and Black-focused. Those are three. It's very important to define that because there are organizations just by virtue of class and race going hand in hand that exist and they serve Black populations, right? But they're not coming from an Afrocentric way of knowing. They're not coming from a mandate and a leadership mm-hmm. that really understands what's needed in this community in order for them to go from point A to point B. And I think that's really important when corporations or individuals are looking into supporting Black communities. If it's not made by us and it's not for us, then it likely doesn't have our best interest at heart.
Let's talk about this time right now because it is interesting on the backdrop of COVID and what is now, a great recession of our time. I wanted to talk about 3B organizations and how they have traditionally been impacted by an economic downturn. What is on your minds and hearts right now as you worry about the work that you do and how you'll be able to support the work that you do?
So in a situation or an environment where the economy is not doing well, mm-hmm. Two things happen. One is the capacity of the organization might be further impacted by that recession. But most importantly, the needs of the community is going to be further impacted. That means we would have more needs coming up because of unemployment, poverty, all those kind of other issues that may come, stress, mm-hmm. Mental health. And that's a challenge because then to reorganize the services within that sector when the economy is going to recover is like recreating something fresh. Mm-hmm. And number one, that would require more resources than if it was at least supported during the time, but also the disappearance of that sector is going to further impact how communities are going to survive or access services or be supported.
What is the state of the not-for-profit and charitable sector right now? How sustainable is the model, the way that it stands right now?
It's quite challenging for organizations to be able to sustain their operations in sort of even a traditional, thriving economy, because there's always these pressures of being able to have to find funding to support both your operations as well as your programming. And so we see that folks are struggling with, applying for grants at the government level, also trying to secure some revenue from perhaps your own economic activities, whether it's, having a sort of social enterprise in some ways. Mm-hmm. But then that can serve to actually impede your ability to keep that money because, either the government or some of your funders look at the fact that you're able to bring in money and they're like, well, you're bringing in your own money, so we need to reduce our funding, or that's actually not allowed. So the sustainability of the sector is really, I think that model is put into question when organizations aren't able to create diverse streams of revenue in order to keep things going and are constantly, just struggling to keep the lights on.
Canadians pride themselves on, our healthcare system. And so we don't really talk about systemic racism that is embedded within the system. I'd love for you, Lieben, to talk a little bit about the work of Taibu and why this is so critical to ending systemic racism.
Particularly if you look at the Black community, there are some very disturbing stats that show that we are at the bottom of any kind of measurement around health and social well-being. If you look at chronic disease, diabetes, the Black community is probably 3 to 4 times at greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to other racialized groups, but the predominant white society. Mental health, we are overrepresented in mental health institutions, and particularly in forensic mental health departments. If you look at access to services, we are not accessing services at the right time, in the right way. Another example is with youth, particularly, they don't access mental health services through normal pathways around primary care. They go through the criminal justice system, and once you are in that system, you are in a revolving door of criminal justice, mental health institution, criminal justice, mental health institution. So there are some very basic kind of challenges and barriers that the Black community faces, and the establishment of Taibu was to address those barriers by providing, just like what AGAPI was saying earlier on, in terms of the culturally focused and services that are based on lived experiences of Black communities. Healthcare system has used certain experiences to further stigmatize and criminalize, or even kill Black communities with research studies and things like that. So the community does not trust the healthcare system, whether it's the healthcare professional or the hospital or the institution. It's not a situation that has happened now. It's generation over generation. It's very systemic. And so changes should not just happen in lifestyle modification with individuals. Changes should also happen with institutions, policies, and practices.
I think that it's important that when corporate Canada is thinking about what kinds of organizations and where they want to put their dollars and their resources, that we have to broaden the scope. I think a lot of the times it's easy to think about education, of course, comes up, and serving young people, of course, comes up, but there's some intricacies to particular areas like healthcare that I don't think are always thought of at the forefront. And I'm appreciating that you're being able to articulate just how much that impacts the system.
No one who is not Black can even imagine what goes through a Black person's mind and how race is at the forefront of every interaction and everything that we do. And so the work that we do at SEA, often people would refer to us as an employment agency, and that is not what we are. We are not an employment agency. We just know that employment is the tool to reach our mission, which is that young people will be able to become financially stable enough to provide for their families and in turn their communities, and that they'll be able to contribute to the Canadian economy just like any other Canadian would, and that they have good quality of life. We recognize that this country has a very large labor gap. We've identified 5 major labor gaps in the Canadian market that in the next 10 years, if these are not filled, those industries are going to be in trouble, right? So that's entertainment, trade, social services, hospitality, and entertainment. And we acknowledge that we do not have a people gap in this country. And I think a lot of the time, because communities who have traditionally had access, those communities are running out of people, right? Because all of those communities are the ones who can't find anyone. But we don't have a people gap. We have a skill gap. In our community, we have a skill gap. And so what we do is we train young people to be able to take advantage of where those labor gaps are in the Canadian economy, so that they can then, access really great healthcare and be able to, express themselves through art and enjoy what other Canadians take for granted. But I think that corporate Canada at the same time has an obligation to give space for those people to be able to say, like, I don't have to behave like so-and-so, because that's what diversity is. I think we are very confused as a country as to what diversity and inclusion really means. It's not, oh, there's a Black person on my board. Yep.
Right. That's diversity. That's not inclusion.
It's not inclusion.
Yeah.
And, even as we give the definition of Black-led, Black serving, like, it's also not a check. You gotta have a conversation with the leadership there. You have to dig and you have to ask questions if you're really invested in our communities. My mother would always tell me, do you want to be the best of the best, or do you want to be the best of the worst? Because as a Black person in this country, you're going to need to be the best of the best all the time. You can never fall short of that mark. And I think that's a skill that most Black people have. That mentality, like, I have to be great. I have to be able to strive and outshine everyone else. And I think that type of resilience and innovation and always trying to secure your spot is actually a trait that corporate Canada should be taking advantage of. Like, that's something that is innately in our community, that if you don't allow people to bring their entire self to the work, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of that. And that's not equity and inclusion.
It sounds ideal, but unfortunately, I know that it's just, we don't have an environment within corporate Canada where that exists. Can you talk a little bit about the center, but also talk about why art helps to create and instill identity in Black young people, so that they can go and be themselves and know what that means to be themselves in a space where we've always had to melt or change or shift? What does that really look like?
I mean, I think art is a really important tool in the fight against anti-Black racism, particularly because art moves us, right? We can all think of a book, a TV show, a movie that transported us or built our understanding of experiences that are different than our own. And so art becomes this ability to help us all better understand who we are as individuals, and as well other people in our communities. And so NIA Center for the Arts was born out of the recognition that Black artists in this country are, excellent in many fields, whether it's writing, music. Our, 2 greatest musical exports in this past decade are from the Black community, Drake and The Weeknd. Amazing writers. Essie Nguyen, won the Literary Book Award for Excellence this year. And so there's all these examples of us being great, but you can't experience art from the Black community except for during Black History Month, and in select ways, And so given that Toronto is home to the largest Black diaspora, it's important for us to have a space that we can regularly find narratives, experiences that reflect our unique identities. And what I found in my work over the past decade is that Black artists have been historically underfunded and undersupported. And so when we think about the role that our photo albums play in our families, we hold our personal histories, but galleries and museums, they hold our collective histories. And we don't find Black art represented, and objects that are associated with their culture represented in these spaces. And so it leaves this gaping hole in our national identity and our ability to understand the experiences of Black Canadians. So NIA Center was born to be able to both showcase, promote, and support art from Black Canadians. We're now embarking on our most ambitious work yet, and that's to transform our space, 14,000 square feet, into Canada's first professional multidisciplinary center that's dedicated to Black Canadians, artists, and their work.
It's beautiful work, and I applaud you for it. I'm cheering for you and the build of this. I want to talk about, all of you have had really great experience in working with government, in working with corporations in order to try and advance the work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. Can we talk really honestly about what is not working in that process with corporate Canada? What are some of the key things that you have run into that just don't work or serve in the way that you need?
I think one of the issues I've found is that, right off the bat, when we come in and work with corporations, is that they want us to do this kind of work for free. It becomes a Black History Month celebration. Let's bring in some artists. Let's have folks, sing, put up their artwork. And this is great exposure for them. They're getting exposed to a new audience. Mm-hmm. There's no other industry in which you ask people to create, to produce something for free. Mm-hmm. And so it's always baffles me that, folks are approaching us wanting to, work together and partner, but are unwilling to, pay artists an appropriate and fair compensation mm-hmm. for their time and really the work that it takes to both produce the piece, transport it to your office, come and talk about it, and then go home for just exposure. And I think the other sort of missed opportunity that I try and advocate for is around education, right? We have such a short window usually to talk about these issues, usually reduced to February, the coldest and shortest month in our time, in our calendar year. And, the conversation has to go beyond just let's put up some artwork and instead move into how can we talk about this piece in relation to the Black Canadian experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that corporations can be an important site for us to advance a conversation around race that moves beyond, there are Black Canadians in Toronto in particular, right? And help us better understand what is the context in which Black Canadians came to this country. We have a long history of being here, hundreds of years, in fact. We have diverse experiences. We are one of the most diverse diasporas, I think, in the world. We have folks who are from the Caribbean, East Africa, West Africa, who speak different languages, are of different sexual orientations, different religions. And so we have this rich cultural fabric and legacy just within the Black community mm-hmm. alone. How do we better understand what that looks like here? And what is the experience of, our Black colleagues in the space that we're in and in the broader city and community that we live in? And that disconnect, I think, is something that we work to close in the partnerships that we've established, but is one that I'd like to see more of.
We have to look at the big system, and corporate Canada and foundations have significant roles to play. Mm-hmm. They have the resources, they have the knowledge, they can open doors for people to come in and do stuff, right? Whether they're artists to be exposed to opportunities and for the system to also themselves be exposed to some of the skills and talents that they have, right?
In order for us to see change in our community, we need to take a person-centered. What are your barriers? Okay, we're with you. We're going to break down those barriers together. We're providing you with the hammer and we're just going to make sure you can kick it down. And if not, we're here with the second hammer, mm-hmm. And I think that, when corporate Canada or when folks reach out to us and then they're kind of just oh, well, that doesn't necessarily fit into, whatever it is that folks are looking for. And I think that, it won't fit into a box that a corporation has created as a mandate or because you have not taken time to get to know our community and our needs. Mm-hmm. We have, 8 years of experience. We have a 92% retention rate. 92% of the people who walk through our doors end up in employment and our mission, and we're starting to see our mission come to fruition. That doesn't come with, us arbitrarily being oh, well, let's just run a program and right. see you later, right? And so I think it's important that there needs to be a place of learning.
And it's not easy. Most of the time, the organization that's, being partnered with doesn't have the same resources and capacity as the corporation, but is expected to meet in the middle. And that just isn't possible for so many.
No. And I think there's ways in which you could do that, because at Sea we have done that in a really successful way that I think we, are proud of. That partnership is like in our IT sector, we partner, one of our streams is called industry led, and we partnered with Spin VFX and we said, what are your skill gaps in your organization that you need people like to be skilled up in?
I see that as, you being in the leadership position, you being at the table, understanding the community. And I think that that's really valuable for corporate Canada to hear. And in this time, I think there's a lot of embarrassment. There's a lot of shame right now. People are worried, scared. I know so many organizations are trying to do their best within a system that is flawed. And again, there's so many good people in so many places. And I think a lot of the time what we see is when we think about diversity and inclusion, and especially diversity and inclusion offices or areas of an organization, you see a lot of good people that are maybe even community people that are there. But the expectation on those community people to solve it, fix it, also is a barrier within the system. And I have spoken to many people within corporate Canada that are, Black leaders within corporate Canada, that all that pressure to change a system above them that is not possible to change overnight or because one person is there with an understanding.
The only relationship that we've had with corporate Canada has always been supported by a Black employee, right? So when Levan talks about the community level or the knowledge level being at sort of a front line or sort of lower level, employee, that tends to be the case. They tend to have a relationship with us. But in the C-suite, at the executive level, at the board level, you don't see that same understanding, awareness, or interest. Right. And so it's very difficult for us to build relationships with corporate Canada on a long-term basis, in a strategic way, in a collaborative way, in a way that can move the needle on these issues, because we don't have the buy-in truly from the organization. We have the buy-in from a supportive Black employee who understands the need to connect to community and has a desire to make a difference, as opposed to the entire, organization coming and saying, we're part of this Canadian ecosystem. We recognize that racism is an issue. We recognize that, the Black community is not well served by, either our organization or, the broader society, and we want to make a difference. And that's the kind of partnership that we need to see in the kind of statement and commitment. And we started to, be able to see that with, Blackout Tuesday and, these solidarity statements. But it does need to go much further than that because we've never seen it. How do you deepen your relationship with the Black community? How do you deepen your own organizational understanding of how anti-Black racism manifests in your organization? And then you're in a better position to have these conversations with community partners to develop strategic initiatives or invest in strategic initiatives that move the dial.
One of the things is you need to put some of the commitments you're going to make in that statement, not just denouncing what's happening and saying we are allies, but we are going to demonstrate our allyship to this cause by doing A, B, and C internally as an organization. So that now got us into some conversation as to identifying certain projects that we can get involved with to support them to develop that so that they can make some changes. It could be an HR situation, it could be a project that they're working on that needs to now have a different lens because it's not addressing the issue of anti-Black racism.
I like how you say that, how you say it's, when you put a statement outside or when you're giving funding, it's outside, but what is happening
inside?
Within?
And that is the long-term change that we want, right? Yes. We are not expected to change. I mean, one Indigenous elder said this once, and it's going to stay with me forever, right? We didn't oppress ourselves, right? We didn't colonize ourselves. Right. So the change cannot happen always with us. I mean, it's good. We're happy to go to corporations and start the engagement, as you were just saying. But I think that the change happens within, and we're okay also to work with corporations. The financial donation and support is great, but we don't want it to be a one-off thing just at this time. We want the systems to change so that we have now better opportunities for young people to access employment opportunities and build their skills. And corporate Canada will benefit because now they have, people who are bringing those skills into the corporations, into the economy, right? With the same thing with education, the same thing with arts, right? So we are ready to work. We don't mind going to corporations and engaging the conversation. We just need for that interaction and for that willingness to do that, whether it's through financial resources, whether it's through capacity building and exchange of capacity, because communities have capacity, corporations have capacity. We can work together to make our society even better. I mean, Canada is a good place to be. It could be even better.
Of course, we need look no further than your community or our Indigenous communities across this country that are suffering and still even don't have basic infrastructure access to clean water. I mean, how can a prosperous nation have people within the borders of that country, the first peoples of this country, to not have those accesses, but to still have that conversation? It's time for us to not be so polite. Is that true?
I think we need to stop. I think it's not even a politeness. I think it's a naivety. You don't know what you don't know. And so something that's not part of your reality, you're never going to really think about. If I'm somebody who doesn't know how to cook, I'm not going to know how to measure. I'm not going to know how long I need to bake something, because that's just, I order out and somebody else, handles that for me. And so that will never be something that I feel the need to learn. But I think we're in a moment now where, I often have been saying this during this time, is that we can't unhear and we can't unsee. So what are you going to do about that? I think the problem that the rest of the world outside of our communities does not understand is this is a 365 for the last couple centuries of work. We didn't wake up and say, we really have to address anti-Black racism today. We have been doing this work for a very long time. Our communities have been in crisis for a very long time. All of these kind of critiques around protests and et cetera, it's all coming from a place where people think that this just showed up. It didn't just show up. Now it's everybody's problem. Everyone's enraged and some people are upset around protests. And it's just that type of turmoil, that type of urgency, that type of anger has been stewing in our communities for years. Look at what we've done to Indigenous communities. We literally have come into this land, stolen it. They're still fighting for clean water. People want to give to wells in Africa. Look in your own backyard, because you have Indigenous people right now, this second in 2020, who don't have clean drinking water because our government and the powers that be do not value the lives of Indigenous people. And I think if you solve the problems of Indigenous and Black communities, because both of our communities are the most disproportionately affected by anything that happens on a regular day, let alone a whole pandemic, right? If you solve the problems of Black and Indigenous communities, you automatically solve the problems for everyone else.
I know that there is so much value and resource in what the communities, like the Indigenous and Black communities, have and know about mental health, about injustice, about expression, art, all of these pieces that can be lent to the larger challenges that corporate Canada face right now from an economic perspective. I'd like to end with just asking each of you, if you can, knowing that corporate Canada is listening right now, what is one thing, one piece of advice or one action step that you would like to see happen?
We are ready. We have been ready for a very long time as a community and as a generation. And I'm hoping that, corporate Canada can see this as not just something that they can do for a community, but they're doing it for everybody. We are part of that problem and we are also part of that solution. Let's come together in this bigger circle, and that's also an African-centered principle of coming into the circle and addressing the issue together.
How are we contributing to this problem? And yes, how are we part of the solution? And that could be looking, internally at the representation of Black folks at all levels of the business. B, investing in research to better understand the experience of Black Canadians across this country and in the communities that you work in. And C, making strategic investments to close those gaps. And sitting with community, collaborating, partnering with community to address these issues in reciprocal ways is the only way that we're going to actually make sustainable and systemic change over the long term. I think this is an opportunity for us to live up to the reputation that we have across this world. And I think that can be done with exactly what Liban had said. Together, finding solutions. And I speak to my community as well when I say this. It's not necessarily a time to look back and say, but you never did, but you didn't, and this kind of blame game and this contention that it's creating. We're committed to moving forward in a new direction, in an innovative way. We're in a moment in time in history that we've never seen. And I think that as businesses are thinking about how they're going to relaunch, and as a lack of a term, like relaunch out of this pandemic, and how they're going to do things differently, and some of the things that they'll keep from how they've been operating for the last couple of months, and what they'll do differently. Let this be part of that. Let this change be what moves us forward.
I know there's a lot of embarrassment, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of we haven't done enough, but that doesn't mean that you can't come now.
Yes.
And that I think the community is very receptive to, let's move forward. Let's look at this point now forward. Let's make that change. The history hasn't been exceptional.
Yeah.
So let's make it exceptional now. Let's take this time to create change now. Thank you so much for all of your time and being here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.